Good afternoon. Welcome to OCASI's webinar, Income Diversification, Sustainability, and Social Enterprise. This webinar is 1 hour in length. My name is Juanita Smith, and I'm the coordinator of OCASI's Organizational Standard Project, and I'm here with my colleague Petra Roberts, who is providing the technical support. Today's webinar is the first of a 6-series webinar that goes to July 2nd. Today, we will be looking at Introduction to Sustainability and Funding Diversification. This issue, funding diversification, has been identified by the OCASI members as the #1 priority for the sector. And as such, OCASI has built this series to provide agencies with the resources that would assist them to address this issue within their agency. Prior to every session in the series, we will send out a specific announcement with a webinar link, providing you the opportunity to register at that time. This project is funded by Citizenship and Immigration Canada, as well as the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And its sole purpose is to assist organizations to address their agency capacities. For today's session, your mic is muted. There's a panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to type your questions in that panel, and it will come through to one of us here at OCASI and or the facilitator. We will provide opportunities to get your feedback through a number of polls within the 60 minutes. I want to let you know that these webinars will be recorded and archived within days of this presentation. As well, the slides to these webinars will be sent out to you later on today. Today, the facilitator of this session is Doreen Weston. Doreen has over 25 years experience in a range of services related to immigrants and refugees. Her friendly professional manner and her ability to listen carefully makes her an excellent facilitator. Doreen is the principal consultant of Full Circle Consulting, and her area of expertise, or I should say Full Circle Consulting's expertise, is in instructional design and delivery, organizational development and capacity building, including governance, program design and evaluation, and writing and editing. We welcome you back, Doreen. I should say that this is the second time that we're running this series. We ran it in the summer of 2012. It was very well received. And we thought we would offer it a second time, providing more people an opportunity to participate. Thank you so much, Doreen, and thank you so much for joining us. Doreen, I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much, Juanita, and welcome to everyone. And hello to any of you that I may have already met that are attending today. So yes, it's my pleasure to repeat this first webinar in the series. I would also like to add to my bio before we start that I do volunteer in the sector and am pleased to offer that perspective of a board member as well. I'm currently the chair of a board for an organization serving newcomer women, and I'm on a regulatory body as a council member, so it's all very, very interesting. So thanks again. Let me tell you for a moment about our approach to the webinar series, and as I do this, I will ask Petra to launch the first poll. So please take a moment to see the poll and then also just click on the answer, and if you don't know the answer, then just don't bother responding to it. So while the poll is on your screen, let me tell you that I've worked in close collaboration with Kathy Lang of C. Lang Consulting to develop the content and the approach to this series. So a big thank you goes to Kathy. I'll be presenting the first 2 webinars in the series. She and I will do the third one together. The theme of that one is collaboration. And then Kathy will do the remaining 3 webinars on social enterprise. And that will take us from spring to summer. And as Juanita mentioned, that will end on July the 2nd. So the plan is to hold them every 2 weeks. Rather than try to cover too much in the time that we are provided, we're going to focus on a manageable number of key messages, and when we come to them, we'll identify them as such. We'll try to keep it simple, and we'll try to allow time for reflection. As Juanita mentioned, this webinar will be about an hour. Some of the later ones will be a bit longer. So I'll present some slides to you, and you're welcome to type in questions and comments as they occur to you, and Petra will make sure that I get them. So wonderful. So Petra, could we have a peek at those poll results? I can't see them on my screen. Let's just see. So what I'm going to do is ask Paula. I can see what you're looking at, but I can't read the fine print. So I'm going to ask Petra, to just type in the results for me. Or actually, you take a look and see the results. I won't be able to comment on them until I hear from Petra. So I'm just going to keep us moving. One second, just a little bit of trouble moving the slide. Perfect. So today's learning objectives, what we're hoping is that you will be able to define nonprofit sustainability, understand several factors that influence sustainability and organizational resiliency, see why revenue diversification is an important sustainability strategy, and begin to identify different revenue streams. So first of all, we'll look at a definition of nonprofit sustainability. We'll look at the factors that influence, how revenue diversification is one of the many sustainability strategies, and then start thinking about revenue options. So everybody's talking about sustainability. What does it really mean? Sometimes it's useful to think of things in terms of an equation. So funding is often the first word that comes to mind when we hear the term sustainability. But organizational sustainability is made up of more elements. So think of it as the financial side plus the programming side. While funding is an important aspect of organizational sustainability, it's only part of the equation. In this equation, in the first part, notice that financial sustainability refers to the future as well as the present. And as directors of your organization or executive directors or senior management, you always have one eye to the future. The above definition also includes attention to programming in all phases of its life cycle and an emphasis on programming that responds to the groups that you serve. And these two are very closely connected. If you do some analysis of your own situation, you may find that it's program results that drive your financial results. So what does this mean? For example, perhaps your revenue is directly linked to the number of clients you serve or the number of cases you manage. So those of you that have government funding for employment services will be familiar with this kind of funding model. We encourage you to set aside the time to broaden your thinking and come up with new and innovative ways to sustain your organization, ones that will offer you some more flexibility. So following on our mathematical theme, let's look at a formula. Through its work developing and refining the core capacity assessment tool, the TCC group has found that the key ingredients for nonprofit sustainability are the ones that you see here in this graphic. Decisive, strategic, and accountable leadership, plus adaptability, plus program capacity, and the resources to deliver core programs. There's a whole body of work out there on leadership and leadership in the nonprofit sector. Rather than try to broach the whole big topic, we'll just touch on a few points here. Strong leaders inspire and motivate others. They ensure that staff understand the benefits of success as well as the consequences of not succeeding. Sustainable leadership means letting go of consistently poor performers, whether paid or volunteer, and making decisions that stakeholders agree are cost-effective. For example, you may measure the cost per child who improves his or her study behaviors rather than the number of children served. It's not easy to let go of poor performers. It's a challenge, and we know that in the nonprofit sector, a lot of people could use support with human resource management, but sometimes it's just what has to be done. This focus on cost effectiveness enables leaders to make decisions grounded in the organization's mission and vision, and we'll come back to that point over and over again. Financial adaptability is about long-term relationships with stakeholders, effective financial management practices, and being informed about trends in the environment. Program adaptability includes the capacity to conduct program evaluation. Effective program management includes a high level of quality control and a focus on continuous quality improvement, another topic that is widely covered in the literature. It distinguishes between best practices, necessary practices, and unnecessary practices. Another great thing to keep in mind. So taking a step back and asking yourself tough questions about what is necessary is very important and worthwhile. There's a book called Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud, and it's a very good read. He talks about how we need to prune our rose bushes to make them flower, and how to apply this approach to our work and our personal lives. So again, that title is Necessary Endings. I just got it from the public library. So thank you, Petra. You've given me the results from the poll. When it's split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So 1/3 of the listeners today, have revenues from 100,000 to 500,000, 1/3 from 500,000 to $1 million, and 1/3 from 5 million. Great, thank you. So moving on, in order to be sustainable, all organizations need to take the time to pause and reflect and ask themselves some important and sometimes difficult questions. This includes staff at many levels as well as the board. We'll mention the role of staff and board in financial sustainability a little bit later. So the first thing is to decide whether you're thinking about sustaining an entire organization or a program. So for very small organizations, that may be one and the same. But for others, they've got a wide range of programs to think about. So here are the 4 key questions. What is core to your organization? What's your niche? That is, how is what you provide or do different from others? What do you truly believe needs to be sustained, and why? So the answer to these questions can't be, well, you know, just because, or we've always done it this way. Nope, that's not good enough. Put some real thought into it and be disciplined. Don't take shortcuts, and you'll be illuminated by the results. One technique you may be interested in using in order to get more depth to the answers to these questions is called the 9 whys. Sometimes you see it as 5 whys, but if you can go for 9, do that. So you're asked, what do you do when working on X, Y, Z, whatever the subject is? Make a short list of activities. So you work in a partnership with someone who asks you the questions. Then for each activity, you say, why is that important to you? Why, 9 times, or until you can go no deeper. This powerful exercise helps you articulate a clear purpose. We've included the link to the Liberating Structures website on our resources slide. You can learn more about this technique and others that will help you to engage staff, board, and key stakeholders. So the key message here is that funding diversification must be driven by a focus on mission and what is core to your organization. I'm going to ask Petra to launch the second poll and to do that favor for me by typing in the results. This is about your organization's culture of evaluation. So please read the statement and click the appropriate response. So while you're doing that, I'll start talking to you about evaluation. Let's talk about the why of nonprofit sustainability. In a nutshell, you must have evidence supporting the need you would like to continue addressing. We already know from our funding applications that funders ask us to back up our description of the need with references to research, etc. We can also play a role in gathering our own evaluation results. Just like with real estate, we talk about location, location, location. With evaluation, it's evidence, evidence, evidence. So what's required to continue along this path towards organizational sustainability? Evidence of need, evidence of impact, and evidence of community support. It's advisable to be building this evidence and evaluating your impact anyway as a good practice. But don't be hard on yourselves if you haven't done this in detail all along. Once I read this really interesting book on personal finances, and it talked about not being too hard on yourself if you hadn't started saving for retirement when you were 10 years old. And it started about just no shame, no blame, start where you are and do what you can. So this is the same for me with evaluation. TTC Group has found that organizations that collect and use high-quality data from program evaluation and gather stakeholder input for strategy and implementation efforts are significantly more sustainable than those who do not. This is another key message of today's webinar. So what are the factors that influence sustainability and organizational resiliency? There are some proven ones that have varying degrees of impact depending on the organization. And these are listed on the following 3 slides. When you get the presentation, you can read through the slides at your leisure. I'm just going to highlight a few key points now. In this first slide, while it's difficult to measure, the desire to keep up or grow impact is an important success factor. Keep your staff engaged, recruit board members who are passionate about what you do, involve key members in your community who will let others know how much they support what you do and why. You can involve clients and partners through consulting them and asking for their commitment. Strategic planning is an important theme in this webinar series. We assume that you have a current strategic plan, that you're monitoring it, revising it as required, and thinking ahead to the next one. We assume that you keep track of what's happening in the external environment as well as within your organization. A roadmap to a successful sustainability strategy involves beginning with a strategic plan, making strategic priorities and directions, and setting realistic targets and timelines. A learning organization is one that's prepared to pay attention, learn, and transform itself as the need arises. You may choose to refer to Peter Senge's book called The Fifth Discipline to learn more about his views on what constitutes a learning organization. It was certainly very much in vogue for quite a while. I think a lot of it is still very relevant to us, and the most recent revised edition of The Fifth Discipline came out in 2006. I can't say enough about how beneficial it is for staff and board of the organization to have good internal systems and solid financial management. Every once in a while I do some interim management work, and it really reinforces for me the importance of this, because I can see how internal systems and financial management take a lot of time, and that having that all in place really does free up your energy for bigger picture thinking and planning. So I'm pleased to see the results here from our previous poll about evaluation. 60% of you occasionally conduct formal evaluation and 40% regularly do. So that's great. Carry on the good work. So moving, I'm going to give you another poll now, so this will keep you awake after lunch. Petra, could you please launch the third poll, which is the one on strategic planning? So again, please read the statement and click on the appropriate response, and Petra will give me your answers when the time comes. I'm just going to pause for a second and check in with you. Do you have any questions or any comments about what we've covered so far, or any insights? Please type them in, and I'll respond to them as they come. So let's start delving a little bit deeper into revenue diversification as a sustainability strategy. Kathy and I had a lot of conversations about sustainability, and we really view it as a broad term that includes many different strategies. An example would be succession planning. So making sure that when your senior management leaves the organization, others are prepared to take on the responsibility. Other examples include developing partnership policies, increasing financial accountability, and systems planning. So with revenue diversification, as with some strategic planning approaches, starting with what you know is happening in the external environment is a great place to begin. As many of you know, the funding trend is to provide short-term seed money, not to fund core costs for the long term, leading to a greater challenge to fund core operations, including the executive director's salary. I'm sure that some of you and others that you know say that they really have to fundraise their salary because there just isn't enough money from the different funders. In some areas, organizations like the United Way can't count on raising as much money from the community as before. So some have changed their targets to the number of donors instead of the dollar amount raised. So some research has shown that the United Way in Sudbury was doing that. This shows us that funders themselves may need to diversify their funding bases. Cutbacks in funding are expected to continue over the medium to long term. Not news to you, I'm sure. Some funders are clawing back money based on whether agreed upon targets have been met. So this is a problem for agencies like some of you that claim expenses once the expenses have been incurred. You really want to make sure you're getting your money back, This points to the benefits of having a reserve fund, which is another topic under financial management. But we know that some organizations are having to dip into their line of credit or are having to ask for an advance. There are many reasons to diversify sources of revenue and reduce your dependence on a few main or government funders. So let's take a look. Generating unrestricted revenue gives you more flexibility. Capitalizing on new opportunities, it's wonderful to be able to say yes to something when it presents itself. Gives you a chance to be creative, innovative, to remain nimble and resilient. Great words. To minimize risk and weather change. Weather change could mean change in political priorities. Generate hope and enthusiasm among the staff and promote teamwork across the organization. A diversity of revenue sources seems advisable at first glance. In the second webinar, we'll talk a bit about establishing the right funding mix for your organization. A 2003 study by the Bridgespan Group in the United States found that there's a point at which some organizations moved from diverse funding sources to fewer funding sources, and that this evolution corresponded to its organizational growth and learning. So we'll learn more about that next time. What's the role of the board in income diversification? Some of you may be board members, many of you work with board members. So I spoke with a few colleagues to get a sense from them of what the role of the board is here. Boards have to understand what funding diversification means and what some of the risks are, both the risk to the status quo as well as the risk to expanding your options. Boards set direction for the organization and continue that role with strategic planning. We know from the poll results that 10% of you say the organization has never had a strategic plan. 60% of you are in the middle of a strategic plan period, and 30% of you are in the final year of a strategic plan period. So it sounds to me like 40%, a good 40% of you are going to be rolling up your sleeves and getting back to strategic planning or getting to it for the first time. Board members also have to help to set concrete and realistic targets for different sources of revenue in the strategic plan. They have to be realistic about the capacity of the organization to generate funds from new and different sources. It's very easy to get enthusiastic and say, oh, we can do this and we can have this. But just remember that there are only so many hours in a work week and so many staff that you oversee. It helps for boards to understand that it takes an investment in capacity building and a readiness to generate revenue from new sources. This doesn't happen overnight. It may not happen with your existing staff complement or board complement. So make sure you have the right board members and advisors to make it happen, and be very clear about the role of staff and the role of board. At this point, I'm going to ask Petra to launch poll number 4 of 5, so we're getting there. And this is about whether or not you would say that your organization has a diverse funding base right now. So I'll keep talking to you about keys to funding diversification. In the second webinar of this series, we're going to cover a funding audit, what it is and how useful it will be for you, and you will be given a template for you to conduct one on your own. And later in the series, Kathy will talk about social enterprise. So many of these points are not new. They're common sense, they're good management practices, and every once in a while it's good to be reminded of them and to have the basics in place so you can move forward as opportunities arise. So here we see that keys to funding diversification include having an entrepreneurial culture within your organization, because we know that every organization has its own culture, documenting the information required in a funding audit, as we mentioned before, knowing your niche and what your mission is, having good planning and targets, collecting data, which we mentioned with the evaluation, as well as anecdotal success stories. Communicate your fundraising targets and the progress you're making towards your goal. Base your work on teamwork and partnerships, effective systems, and protocols. In our third webinar, we'll learn more about partnerships, collaborations, and mergers. So now we're moving on to revenue streams, and what are some options for revenue streams? I always find these 2x2 matrices very useful. This is one that comes from an organization in the UK called Mango, like the fruit, M-A-N-G-O. There are different ways to categorize revenue streams or sources of funding. One way is to look at whether the money you receive is restricted or unrestricted, so that's the top and the bottom of our matrix, or whether it is short or long term. So we have the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Restricted funds come with terms and conditions about what the money may or may not be used for. On the other hand, the sole requirement for unrestricted funds is that they be spent furthering your organization's objectives. So think about your I got distracted. Think about your funding sources for a moment and what strikes you right away. So just to let you know that the last poll didn't launch properly, so don't worry, we'll just carry on without it. So again, what funding sources do you have and what strikes you right away about your sources? The funding types matrix in this slide, again, is from an organization in the UK called Mango. And Mango specializes in strengthening the financial management and accountability of non-governmental organizations. So I hope that everyone can hear me all right. Please let me know if you can't. And if you yourself are having any problems with your audio quality, remember to close any unused applications or switch over to the telephone to listen in. That was our break there, our technical break. So let's look more closely at this matrix. General fundraising is income from fundraising events and public donations. It's useful for building up reserves and for funding the gap between what the funder pays for a project and the real costs of delivering it. So hopefully you as an organization have a sense of that sometimes projects cost more than you think or more than a funder will pay for. Project funding, down in the bottom left, is generally from institutional donor agencies, like the government, and generally lasts from 1 to 3 years. This is the most common form of financing for many nonprofit organizations. Program funding, along the bottom right, is provided by funding partners and where there is a strong working relationship with the organization. And here grants are based on program themes. Core financing can be relied upon as regular and flexible. If external funding were withdrawn, the organization would still be able to carry on its core work. So I'm going to say that again because that takes a little thinking about. If some of your other funding from the other quadrants were withdrawn, but you had sufficient core financing, you would be able to still fulfill the mission of your organization. Now in Ontario, we often refer to core funding as funding that covers basic centralized admin and overhead functions. So there might be a slight difference there in how we interpret it. And we know that this is increasingly difficult to come by. So here's another summary of this. Grants, government, foundations, corporate sector involvement, fundraising, events, private donors, product fundraising, meaning sales of products and services, gaming, and then we have sponsorship as another category. So people look at new financing instruments and new investors. They look at achieving outcomes and being paid for performance. Some forms of financing fall out of favor and are brought back and adapted. An example of this is community bonds. They were used in the past by community organizations such as curling clubs and co-ops. One second. Community bonds are a form of loan. They're an RRSP eligible investment that allows individuals and organizations to contribute a certain minimum amount or more towards a specific undertaking of the organization. Community bonds pay a set rate of interest for a set term. The Centre for Social Innovation in Toronto used this social financing tool in order to finance the build-out and retrofit of a property it purchased in downtown Toronto. The loan is secured against the value of the building. If you're interested in learning more information about community bonds, you could go to the Social Innovation website, socialinnovation.ca, all one word, /community bonds. You may not be ready for that yet, but it's certainly something to look forward to in the future. In addition, social impact bonds have generated a lot of interest, even though we don't have them in Canada yet. In that case, a nonprofit organization proposes a project to help solve a social problem and then demonstrates how the government can save money by investing in the solution. Private sector investors also fund the project upfront through a bond issue backed by the government, and then the government pays out premiums. So there's a whole lot of thinking still to do about the implications of this kind of funding and how you track and document outcomes when you have people's personal investments at risk. So where is the money? Who are the right people to involve? So when you're identifying new funding opportunities, you do want to start off with people from any level of your organization, and in fact we encourage you to foster an organizational culture in which coming up with innovative ideas is welcomed. It'll be important to your successful sustainability to hear from frontline staff as well as senior management. Determine the best way to come up with ideas, alone or together or both. So why is this point here in this slide? A common way for quite some time for coming up with new ideas is to conduct a brainstorming session in which a group of people are together, either in person or online, and they contribute ideas without commentary or judgment from the rest. So many of us have had that experience with the flip chart paper, coming up with ideas, building on one another's ideas. However, research has shown that brainstorming is not as effective as we may think, and that it may be better to provide people with some time and a quiet space to generate ideas on their own. This method has resulted in more and more creative ideas than brainstorming. And you'll know what works best for your organization, but you might want to give this a try. Remember your mission. We'll keep repeating that for you. Identify assets that you can build on. Identify and address barriers that may prevent you from diversifying funding successfully. So going back to identifying assets you can build on, I liken this a bit to starting out a new health and fitness regime or regimen. The important part is really getting going, starting where you are and building on what you have to offer. Oops, sorry, I'll go back for a moment. So before I show you some resources, I'd like to just take a few moments to sum up and address some practical issues that you may be thinking about. What would be a logical starting point for organizations thinking about diversifying their funding base? Take a step back and do a funding audit. So again, stay tuned for next time for the funding audit. And be aware of where you really are at the beginning. Sometimes we find that we're slightly to the left of center. Assess the capacity of your board and your staff to generate new sources of revenue and plan to invest in enhancing capacity. And engage all staff and board. I don't see any questions yet from our listeners, so please feel free to type in questions. In the meantime, I'll keep asking. So this might seem overwhelming, but somebody must have done it. So what are some common obstacles and how they might be overcome? Lack of time is a very, very common obstacle, and really there's no big secret here. It's just a question of making this a priority. People feel overwhelmed. I can understand at the director or senior management level, at all levels, there's really a lot to be done in a short while. Sometimes an obstacle is a board of directors that's not willing. For whatever reason, we know that people volunteer out of the goodness of their own hearts. We don't know how much skill they always have or how much time and effort they want to contribute or are able to contribute. And sometimes it's a question of willingness, not just skill and ability, but willingness. It's an obstacle if you start too late and you start in a panic. It's really not ideal to be starting your planning and thinking about this when you're anxious and it's a desperate situation for you. Better to start slowly, better to remember to look outwards to what's happening in the environment. If time is tight and you can't do it all yourself, what can you delegate? What can you prioritize? What volunteers can you call on? What money might you get to hire people to help you out? A final obstacle is an organizational focus on keeping your own empire, in quotation marks, or organization alive at all costs, rather than being open, assessing options, looking for new opportunities that may involve collaboration and new kinds of relationship building. Holding on really tight to what you've got puts you at risk in today's funding environment. Okay, no questions from you yet, so I'll keep asking them for you. What happens when organizations start with a desire to increase revenue and then apply for projects that take them away from their core work? Sometimes we call this mission drift. I can definitely understand the temptation to do that. Doing projects, and you apply for projects. If you get the money, then that's another story. This can sap your energy. It can mean a lot of additional administrative work as funders looking for more accountability, and therefore more accounting is required. You might have your eye off the ball and miss some other important opportunities that come up. And it could also cause confusion for you to stray too far from your core work. Confusion for your clients and confusion for your funders alike. So what words of encouragement can I offer you? You don't finish what you don't start. I know that seems very basic, but I'll say it again. You don't finish what you don't start. If you don't take those first few steps to get moving, you won't be able to look back and see how far you've already come. You likely already have a lot of information, perhaps more than you know. You just need to take the time to look at it in a different way. Don't let perfection stand in your way. Know that what you do doesn't have to be perfect and fancy. It just has to be well thought out. This kind of work is not for publication. It's an internal kind of work. You don't have to worry so much about your external audience in a lot of cases. Just have something that works for you. Encourage entrepreneurial and creative thinking, but balance that with being pragmatic. Again, think about the staff of your organization and how many hours there are in a day. So Petra, let's try and launch poll number 5 and see if it works. I'd like to check in with you at this point to see how you're feeling about sustainability and funding diversification for your organization. So your options are less hopeful than before, the same as before, or more hopeful than before. So I'll pause for a second to let you answer that. And I'll ask Petra to show me the information again. You'll notice that I'm still on this slide. No, I'm not advancing the slides because those points that we just covered were my plan B in case none of you had questions. So let me come back to the last question that I'm asking on your behalf, so to speak. How might an executive director convince the board of the need to diversify sources of income? Provide sufficient background information on trends in the external environment and what other organizations are doing and why. Try to recruit at least a couple of board members to your board who already understand the nonprofit funding environment. Have boards sufficiently versed in financial management, and we know that in the past OCASI has offered webinars and resources on financial management for nonprofits. Provide regular updates to the board on what's happening in the external environment and what might happen. You will always have some keen board members who are very happy to read all kinds of extra materials. So when you're sending out your board agenda and the minutes from the previous meeting, you could also send out links or articles for background reading that will really help the board members get a lot more knowledge. You can also include in your board meetings themselves a few minutes for assessing the external environment. People can bring up what they've learned in the past month or so. Oh, I've heard that this is happening or that is happening, or did you know that there's this new pot of funding? Let more people do the thinking for you. Talk to the board about the importance of their role with respect to fundraising, and run through some scenarios to give your board an idea of what would happen if the major funder cut back on funding. What would you have to give up, and what would you want to maintain? So thanks for answering the poll. 60% of you are feeling the same as before, and 40% of you are feeling more hopeful than before. So good. I'm glad that this hasn't seemed too overwhelming. So let me give you some resources. There are a select few resources to help those of you who are hopeful to continue to be so, and the rest of us to maybe learn a little bit more. So I mentioned here Liberating Structures. This is a group of people. They have a link to Canada, though I think the main ones are based in the States. And they have very interesting, and they're very generous with their materials. If you try that website, you will see that there are many different ways to engage people in conversation, and that this will help you with your sustainability planning. Here's an article that came out in the Canadian press in 2012 that's useful around social impact bonds, if and when the time comes to learn more about those. Marilyn Struthers published an article in The Philanthropist that I know that I have shared with the boards that I sit on supporting financial vibrancy in the quest for sustainability in the not-for-profit sector. It's a really recommended reading. If you would like to learn more about the TCC group, which designed that sustainability formula that we saw in the graphic earlier, you can find out more about them at this website. So what are the key messages from today? Remember that sustainability is about much more than funding. You must have evidence of the needs you would like to continue addressing. And funding diversification must be driven by a focus on mission. So that shows us that it's really, really worthwhile to devote your time and energy to the strategic planning exercises that you probably do already or that you will be learning about. So did we tell you there was going to be homework? It's entirely up to you. This homework is optional, but the more you put into this series, the more you'll get out of it. So as we go through, both Kathy and I will give you some suggestions on what you can do in the meantime or what you can do after the whole series is over. So this first homework assignment is a reflection piece to set the stage for the learning to come. Our ultimate goal is to have you outline a sustainability plan for your organization by the end of this series, so hopefully by mid-July. You may choose to ask other managers in your organization to complete the assignment or to do it with you. And if you're fairly new to the organization or to your position, you may need to ask someone for the history of revenue diversification. So we suggest that you reflect on your experience with revenue diversification as well as on your organization's experience. Record the challenges, the successes, the failures, the tensions, the feelings, all of this, the fears, the insights, and how these have changed over time. So you may have found that at first you were very nervous and anxious, then you got some great funding proposals, and all went well, and you gained your confidence, etc. So take the time to reflect first. Also, in the meantime, take some time to think about questions that you would like us to address. And have questions ready. We'll be very, very happy to address them for you. So we're going to finish up a little bit before the hour. Here's an outline for you to keep in mind of upcoming webinars. On May the 7th, we have sustainability planning, and I'll be doing that with you. It will be a slightly longer webinar. The plan is to present you with a lot of material, and then for those of you who are willing or interested in staying on a bit longer, can take you through the results of a kind of a homework assignment that you might do for yourselves. So we've come up with a fictional financial situation for you. May the 21st, so right after the long weekend, collaborations, partnerships, and mergers. And Kathy and I will do that one together. Then I will hand the reins over to her very capable hands, and she will do the final 3 webinar series for you. Introduction to Social Enterprise on June the 3rd, Social Enterprise Feasibility on June the 18th, and Social Enterprise Planning on July the 2nd, which will be the final one. So you're more than welcome to attend the following webinar in the series, and Okazi will be in touch with you about registration. So thank you very much for listening in today. It's been a pleasure. We hope that you've learned something new and that the webinar has sparked some questions for you. Thanks again to Kathy for her involvement in the series, and to Okazi, Juanita, and Petra for your support. Please remember to complete the evaluation, and we hope that you can join us next time. Have a lovely afternoon.